Hi everyone. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather today, so I opted for the no camera on my face. I don't think you want to see what I look like today. We're going to go over the female reproductive system. Monday we did the male, and so today we're going to look at the female. And as I said in our Google Meet, the female reproductive system will have less structures, but its functioning is going to be a lot more complex. So why? Because females do not need to produce large amounts of gametes, just like males do. So we don't do that. Instead, we are born with all of our eggs. And these immature eggs are contained inside structures called follicles. And every month, one mature egg, also known as an ovum, must be released from the ovary. So that is one of the jobs of the female reproductive system. Each month, one mature egg has to be released from the ovary. And then the other job is also each month, the system, in particularly the uterus, must prepare itself for a possible pregnancy. So you see here it's twofold. Not only do we have to sort of contain those eggs inside of our ovaries and release one each month, we also have to prepare ourselves for the fact that that particular egg might become fertilized and you might have an embryo that needs to be housed in the uterus as well. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at the ovaries. And actually what I should probably do first, it's the same thing that we did with the male reproductive system. I should probably put some pictures in there. Okay, and again, these are from diplomas. And you should be able to label these guys. And so there is a frontal view, and there's also a side view that you have to be able to label when it comes to the reproductive system. So we're going to start with the ovaries, and the ovaries are right over here. So that's an ovary, and number 2 as well on this side. That's an ovary. Okay, and there's 2 of them. They're about the size of 2 large olives. Okay, so 2 large olive-shaped structures found in the pelvic cavity. And this is where we find each of those follicles, and they must be released at a time of the month known as ovulation. So when you're ovulating, what you're doing is you're releasing the egg from the ovary. Okay, and again, I'm going to attach a little picture here just so that you can see. Oh, I'm going to go to my photos. Oh no, this one. recent. That's the one I want. Okay, let's get another page on there. So here you can see the ovary itself, okay? And when we look at this ovary, we have these follicles, these primary follicles that are then going to go through, when we're going through puberty, they're also going to go through meiosis. And then at ovulation, we see that the egg, the ovum, is released from that follicle. This tiny little thing right here is the ovum. And then the leftover follicle is going to be known as the corpus luteum. And we're going to see that the corpus luteum has a function on the hormones that are produced by the female reproductive system. Okay, so that's our ovary right there. And the eggs are released by oogenesis. So if you remember, for males, we talked about spermatogenesis, right? Genesis meaning creation, so the creation of sperm. Here we have oogenesis, so O meaning for the ova, right? So oogenesis is the process. And so we're going to do it the same way that we did when we were looking at sperm. So we're going to have, instead of a spermatogonium, we're going to have an oogonium. And then it is going to start dividing at puberty, just like we had in males. And we're going to end up with, instead of a primary spermatocyte, it's a primary oocyte. That primary oocyte is going to go and perform meiosis 1, and we're going to get a secondary oocyte. And then the secondary oocyte is going to do meiosis 2, second division there. And instead of a spermatid, we're going to end up with an otid. And then that otid is going to mature into an ovum, an egg. So the same way that we end up with a spermatid and then maturation gives us a sperm, we have an otid, and then maturation gives us an ovum, okay? And I want to also point out that there are differences between male and female meiosis. So there is a difference between spermatogenesis and oogenesis. And for that, again, what we're going to do is we're going to use a picture. So you can see here the difference in meiosis between males and females. Okay, so we're going to start with the male. And again, through spermatogenesis, we had that primary oocyte after puberty. And then after meiosis 1, we had our secondary spermatocyte. And then we had this undifferentiated sperm. So we had those spermatids. And then at maturation, we end up with 4 equally viable sperm. Now, the difference here is with females. So females are going to do the same thing, but after meiosis 1, you're going to see that what we're going to have here is a secondary otid, or a secondary oocyte, and a polar body. The reason why this is different in males and females is, remember that the male is only providing the nucleus through the sperm, whereas the female is the one that is providing the nucleus and the cytoplasm. So one of the two cells is hogging all of the cytoplasm. The other one is a tiny little cell with just a nucleus on the inside, no organelles for it to function. Okay? Then when second meiosis occurs again, one of these cells that is produced, one of the otids that is produced is going to hog all of the cytoplasm and the nucleus, and then it's going to make another polar body. And then the first polar body is going to divide into 2 more polar bodies. None of these can be fertilized. And the reason for that is they don't have any organelles. They don't have any cytoplasm. They can't survive. So these guys die off, and it is the ovum that is released by the ovary that contains the nucleus and the cytoplasm that then gets fertilized by the male sperm. Okay? So the reason that we have to, this unequal division in females is we have to collect all of the cytoplasm for the embryo, whereas the males only provide the nucleus for the embryo, okay? Now, the second structure that we're going to look at is the fimbriae. Now, once the egg has been released, what we have is we have these finger-like projections, these structures right here that we see on both sides, and these guys are known as the fimbriae. Now, none of them are labeled over there, so we're actually going to label them here. Okay, so those are the fimbriae, and you can see them on the other side. And so these finger-like projections surround the ovary and help the egg move into the fallopian tubes. Okay, we don't want the egg to sort of go floating around, right? We want it to be pulled into this structure right here. We want it to be pulled into this structure right here, which is known as your fallopian tubes. Fallopian tubes. Okay, and same with one. Okay, and so the fallopian tubes are those tubes that are going to be leading to the uterus. So that's number 3. And then you can see we're labeling these in the order that the egg travels, right? So we're looking at we're following the journey that the egg takes. So the fallopian tubes, so these are the tubes that lead to the uterus. These guys are lined with cilia to facilitate that movement. So that cilia sort of sweeps the eggs toward the uterus. Cilia are just like hair-like projections, like tiny hairs. And the one thing that you need to remember about the fallopian tubes, this is the site of fertilization. So I always think of fallopian F, fertilization F. So this is where egg meets sperm. All right, so if we were looking at that picture again, we would have the egg coming from this side. We would have the sperm that has come in and it's making its journey that way. And as they're both traveling, that's where they're going to be meeting, right? So the egg and the sperm, right? So if this is the little sperm and that's the egg, that's where their journey is going to get them together, is in the fallopian tubes. Okay, so that's the site of fertilization. Number 4 is the uterus. And the uterus is a very muscular structure. It's a muscular organ. In fact, it can stretch quite a bit to hold 7, 10-pound baby, 2 babies, 3 babies, right? And so on. Now, the lining of the uterus known as the endometrium is crucial for pregnancy to occur. And so one of the jobs of the hormones of the reproductive system for females is to make sure that that endometrium is thick, So that lining has to be thick and vascularized. So that means it has to have lots of blood vessels. So thick and vascularized so that the embryo can embed in it and draw oxygen and nutrients from it. So it has to be thick and it has to have lots of blood vessels in it so that the embryo can start to pull nutrients from mom's circulatory system. Okay, so those are, we're going to continue then. So after the uterus, and right here we're going to label it right here. So number 3, we're going to say number 3 is uterus. I'm trying to see where I'm going to fit here my writing. I'm going to say uterus right there. Okay. And I'm going to come over here, uterus. Okay. And at the base of the uterus, what we have is we have number 4. So this section right here, number 4, is known as the cervix. Okay. And I think this is what they're labeling here, is the cervix for this one. So the cervix is sort of this area right here. It's a little channel that you see right here. That's the cervix. And then after the cervix, this is not labeled. You're going to have the vagina right there. And so that's what number 5 would be, is vagina. And then the last one, might as well label it right now. I think what they have on here is they're labeling the urethra because they're showing you that the bladder is separate. So here is the female reproductive system with the uterus and the vagina. And then here is the bladder with the urethra. So that's what they're labeling there. So you don't have to worry about that one because it's not part of the reproductive system for the female. Okay, so we're going to label this 5, cervix. So at the base of the uterus is a channel called the cervix. Whoops. That separates from the vagina. Now, the majority of the time, you're going to see that the cervix is closed. It has something on it called a plug, a mucus plug. And so what this mucus plug does is it prevents any sort of bacterial infection or viral infection, because again, the vagina is open to the outside. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure that there is no infection, nothing coming in that could harm the structures of the reproductive system. And so by having this plug here all the time, it's preventing that bacteria, those viruses from traveling. The only time that you're going to see that mucus plug removed, it's going to be twice. One is when you have your period, and the second time that you're going to see it is going to be when you're ready to give birth. Okay, so those two are going to be the 2 times that you're going to see that cervix plug go away. Now the cervix is also, if you've ever had a pap test, okay, is because it's done because the cervix is prone to cervical cancer. Test to diagnose cervical cancer. Now, cervical cancer is a type of cancer that you can get through sexual transmission. Okay, so it's a type of cancer that you can contract from your partner, and it's the virus that causes it is called HPV, the human papilloma virus. And so the human papilloma virus will give you cervical cancer. So you have to be careful. Part of that being safe in intercourse is making sure that you don't catch sexually transmitted infections, like, for example, the papillomavirus. Now, in junior high, you guys would have had an HPV shot in order to prevent the infections that can come from this virus. Okay? All right. And the pap smear, then, what it does is it checks, first of all, for HPV. It checks for that infection. And then it also checks for irregular cells. So if you have cells that are sort of cancerous looking, they're dividing and they're kind of looking a little different, then that's what the doctor is checking for. Okay? Caused by HPV, human papillomavirus, right? And it is 98% curable if caught in time. And that's why we do those pap tests. And usually you would do them once every 3 years. So if you have a clear pap test done once, then you don't have to have a test again until 3 years from then. Okay. Now, number 6 is the vagina. Okay. This is the birth canal and also the site for semen deposit. During intercourse. Okay. We know that it produces acidic secretions. I told you guys about those Bartholin glands that we have on either side of the vagina produces the acidic secretions again because the vagina is open to the outside and therefore vulnerable to invaders. And so that's why sperm requires the secretions from the prostate, from Cowper's gland, in order for them to sort of survive that kind of an environment. Okay. It also has a very balanced flora or a colony of bacteria and yeast. So the vagina has a balanced amount of bacteria growing in it and yeast growing in it. And if those numbers are ever out of balance, then that's when you would get a yeast infection. All right, so for example, let's say that you're taking antibiotics because you have an ear infection. Okay, you go to the doctor gives you antibiotics for your ear. But antibiotics are going to kill all bacteria, not just the ones that are growing in your ear. A lot of babies, actually, a lot of little girls that get ear infections that are prescribed antibiotics develop a yeast infection. And the reason for that is that as the bacteria die due to the antibiotic, the yeast flourishes. And as the yeast grows, you're going to have yourself a yeast infection. Okay, what you can do is you can take medication for that, which lowers your yeast numbers. In the meantime, allowing the bacteria to grow back. And then once the bacteria grows to its original numbers, it'll keep the yeast at bay. So the two of them balance each other out. Okay. And lastly, number 7 is the vulva. The vulva is the name given to the female exterior genitalia. So here we're talking about the labia majora, the labia minora, which are in Latin it translates to large lips and small lips. These guys are just skin folds that protect, again, against invaders. And then the other part of the vulva is the glans clitoris or clitoris. Okay, and remember that that's the equivalent of the glans penis, the tip of the penis for males, right? So same idea, lots of nerve endings, very sensitive, and it's there because in males that develops into the penis, and so we have sort of a remnant of that doesn't grow for females. Okay, so this is the structures of the female reproductive system. The second video I'm going to put up is going to deal with the hormones and the menstrual cycle. I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.